Did you know, in the movie Pinocchio, Walt Disney actually thought that animated movies were not for kids. That is why this movie is extremely dark and creepy at some points. Pleasure Island in this movie was actually originally called Bogeyland as well. There is actually a donkey carved into the back of the chair that Pinocchio is sitting on in Pleasure Island. This was the first hint that this was really the intention of what was going on at Pleasure Island. All of the kids were turning into donkeys, and this was really messed up. In the movie Pinocchio, they actually used about 700 to 800 storyboard artists and animators on this film. Pinocchio was the second movie made all time by Disney, and this is one of a lot of people's favorites. There was so much hard work put into this, and I honestly thought when I watched it this year that the animation was way ahead of its time. Although Pinocchio is the main character, Jiminy Cricket actually has more lines. He also has more screen time and is really the core part of the entire movie as his conscience. In order to have Pinocchio talk underwater, they tried many different things. The first one was having the voice actor for Pinocchio try and talk with water in his mouth. This didn't work, and they actually found a cool way to do this with a mic before the technology was there. They found out that they had to coil an internal wire inside of the microphone. This distorted the microphone so much, but it sounded like that he was actually underwater, and this is what they used for the film. When Pinocchio is put in the cage by Stromboli, the Blue Fairy comes to save him. Pinocchio tells the Blue Fairy that he was captured by a green monster and his nose grows. This actually does happen in the 1883 novel though. A fisherman that was green mistaken Pinocchio as a fish and almost tried to eat him. There was actually 2 million drawings made by the animators for this movie, and at least 300,000 made it into the final movie. Keep in mind, this was the late 1930s when this was made, and I thought it was so ahead of its time, and Disney was on their game. Gideon the Cat in Pinocchio actually was supposed to have a lot of lines. Mel Blanc actually recorded several lines of dialogue for many scenes for Gideon the Cat, but they ended up not using any of them. The 3 hiccups that Gideon makes throughout the movie and the small vocals of the goldfish in the film actually are the only vocal performances that stayed in the movie for Mel Blanc. The movie Pinocchio originally did terrible at the box office in the 1940s. It was not until 5 years later in 1945 that they actually saw a profit from this movie. This was when they re-released it, and to this day it is still one of the top Disney movies of all time. Gideon and Foulfellow were actually supposed to meet Pinocchio for a third time. During this third time though, the police would catch and arrest them. This though was kept out of the movie after being in a very original script. For the movie The Little Mermaid, they actually studied how they achieved the underwater sound effects for Pinocchio. They looked back at what the sound designers and sound technicians did for Pinocchio, which was made in 1940, so 40 years later, they still took inspiration from Pinocchio for the water sounds. In the late 1930s, Walt Disney was not happy with how the production was going and actually halted it. He wanted to rethink the story and redesign some of the characters and change some of the scenes so that it was perfect to his liking. Let me know in the comments, do you like the movie Pinocchio? I actually just watched it for the first time this year. Originally, Jiminy Cricket was not introduced into the story until 9 months into production. In the 1883 Pinocchio novel, Pinocchio actually killed Jiminy Cricket with a mallet. Originally, Lampwick the donkey was supposed to try and leave Pleasure Island with Pinocchio and Jiminy Cricket. But right before he could leave, the coachman's minions captured him, and he basically said, "I'm a goner, save yourself," and he was able to let them go free, but he sacrificed himself. Let me know in the comments, would you have rather seen this happen? Earlier on in the movie, if you look to the left when Jiminy Cricket is singing, you'll see that there is a Peter Pan and an Alice in Wonderland book. It was while making Pinocchio that Walt Disney began working on the stories for Peter Pan and Alice in Wonderland, which would come out in 1951 and 1953. The character of Figaro the Cat got more screen time because of Walt Disney. Every time Walt Disney got shown a script or anything to do with the movie, he just wanted more Figaro in the film. By the end of the 1940s, Figaro showed up in about 8 of Disney's cartoons and the movie. Geppetto's clocks were actually made in real life for the animators to study. To help the animators, nearly all of Geppetto's clocks were actually made in the Disney studios in the 1940s. Did anyone else notice this in the movie Pinocchio? Evelyn Venable, who was the physical model and the voice of the Blue Fairy, was also the model for the original Columbia Studios logo. Here she is right here. Let me know if you ever knew this. Pinocchio, made in 1940, was actually one of the most expensive movies made at the time. It was the late 1930s and the original budget for the film was $500,000. While making the film, they realized that this was going to be way too little and they ended up needing $2.5 million to make Pinocchio, and it didn't make money back for at least 5 years. So throughout the movie, Jiminy Cricket actually has about 27 different colors on his body and in his clothes. This was actually pretty challenging for the animators at the time.